The 1997 Jazz were arguably the best team the Chicago Bulls ever went up against during either of their three-peat runs. And in 1997, the Jazz made their first ever appearance in the NBA Finals after John Stockton hit a buzzer-beater three in Game 6 against the Rockets to vanquish the Hall of Fame laden team and head to their first Finals appearance. The reason for doing this series was to highlight all the great teams that history is slowly fading from the record books and to show how they came up just a little bit short. Let's point out a few things before we jump in. How come the Jazz used the same intro music as the Bulls? Did you notice that? Did every team in the league have the Alan Parsons Project on replay? Jazz fans gave the term whiteout a whole new definition, and the Decibel Center was the most appropriate nickname for an arena I've heard ever. One thing to note about the 97 season is the playoff format was still 2-3-2. So the higher seeded team would have the first two games, lower seeded team would have the next three, and then if necessary, the higher seeded team would have two more games at home if they needed them to close it out. 2013 was the last year to have this format, and then in 2014, the owners voted to go to a 2-2-1-1-1, I guess for ticket sales or to make it more even. I don't really know. I'm convinced that the NBA just wants to sell more tickets because just like any business, they want to make more revenue. So I guess they thought the old format wasn't fair because you could argue the lower seeded team just has to win one game in order to get 3 games worth of ticket sales, even if they lose the series. So as long as you don't get swept as a lower seed, you're getting 3 home games in the playoff series or in the finals, in this case in 97. So here's how the 97 Jazz were etched in history and will go down forever as one of the best almost champions in the NBA. 95 draft, Utah selects Greg Ostertag. Great pickup because the Jazz go 55-27 that year, make the conference finals, lose to the Sonics, who then get steamrolled by the Bulls in the finals. 96 NBA draft, arguably one of the best draft classes of all time. Utah's playing so well, they don't even have a chance to get guys like Kobe Bryant or Allen Iverson. They've got the 25th overall pick, and who do they select? The greatest player in the history of Estonia, Martin Mursep. And you're probably asking, who the heck is that? I didn't know until I started researching for this video. So this draft pick, Martin Mursep, gets traded to the Heat for a future first rounder in 2000. That future first rounder becomes Deshaun Stevenson, who actually would play for the Jazz as the youngest member of the Jazz to ever suit up at 19 years old. Goes on to have a 13-year career in the league. 4 years with the Jazz as a role player, not too shabby. So the second round pick the Jazz have in 96, Shandon Anderson. He becomes a bench player as a rookie. He's averaging like 16 minutes a game, backing up Hornacek and Stockton. So the 96 draft, the Jazz do get a player that would factor into their run. All right, we're getting sidetracked here because only Shandon Anderson really has anything to do with the 97 season, so let's get back to that. Standouts are the obvious ones: John Stockton, Karl Malone, future Hall of Famers. Then you've got Brian Russell, who keeps getting crossed over by Michael Jordan. Antoine Carr, who would play a pivotal role in the playoffs and get significant minutes. Jeff Hornacek, one of my favorite players as a skinny white dude growing up playing basketball. Hornacek and Stockton always gave me hope that I could make the league. Was not in the cards for me, but I always loved watching them. And the bench was pretty deep. We mentioned Shandon Anderson, the rookie pickup in the second round. Howard Isley, Greg Foster, Stephen Howard, Adam Keefe, Chris Morris. So you had a lot of guys that could play minutes that were trusted by Jerry Sloan. And they were in the midst of 20 consecutive playoff seasons, 20 consecutive runs to the playoffs. That's a lot, which I think makes it even more heartbreaking to not win a title. If you make it to the playoffs 20 times, only 2 of those times you end up in the finals. And both times you got to play Michael Jordan. That is just drawing the short straw every time. So a solid squad, 2 Hall of Famers. You've got a second-year guy, Greg Ostertag, a 7-2 monster in the middle. This would also be Karl Malone's first MVP season, which, again, if you saw Last Dance, definitely pissed off Michael Jordan. And one more roster move to mention. The Jazz traded Felton Spencer to the Magic for Kenny Gaddison and Brooks Thompson, who would later be waived and released by the team. And they would also get a 1999 first-round draft pick, which would turn into Andrei Kirilenko, who would go on to have a nice career with the Jazz and in the NBA, but would later end up on a poster because of this guy. Regular season, the Jazz go 64-18 with an amazing 38-3 record at home. I mean, it's not called the Decibel Center for nothing. The Jazz would start the season with a victory over Seattle in their first game. They would also pull off a franchise record 15 wins in a row, including the biggest comeback in NBA history over the Denver Nuggets after being down 36 points late in the second quarter. They would finish the first half of the season with a 33-14 record, and surprise, surprise, Stockton and Malone headed to the All-Star game. This was also the NBA's 50th season, and they announced the greatest 50 players of all time. So it was definitely a cool season for Stockton and Malone, not only going to the All-Star game, but also getting those sweet leather jackets and being named one of the top 50 players of all time. And after the All-Star break, Utah would go on to another 15-game win streak, matching their previous franchise record they set in the first half of the season. So the Jazz would finish the season with their franchise record 64 wins, best record in the West, securing home court throughout the playoffs until the finals because there was one other team with a better record than them. Yeah, you guessed it. The only other team with a better record than the Jazz? Doubles. The 97 playoffs. The Jazz would sweep the Clippers in the first round for their first sweep in a playoff series ever. In round 2, it was the LA Lakers who would be the Jazz's next victim. The Jazz would beat them in 5 games, only dropping 1 game to the Lakers, despite Shaq talking a lot of trash before the series started about how nobody could guard him one-on-one. But fortunately for the Jazz, it's a game of 5-on-5. In the Western Conference Finals, they would face 3 future Hall of Famers in Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, and Charles Barkley, although all later in their careers still put up the biggest fight the Jazz would face, with everything in the Western Conference Finals building to Game 6, where John Stockton would take this shot. So then it was on to the finals to face Michael Jordan and the Bulls, who would, well, look, we all know how this ends, but this was a really tight series. It was the Bulls winning 2 games in Chicago, the first game on a buzzer beater over Brian Russell. Then the Bulls would take game 2, heading back to Utah. The Decibel Center, again, definitely played into Utah getting the win in Game 3 and Game 4. Stockton making a fantastic steal, and then one of the greatest passes in NBA history to Karl Malone. Tied at 2 going into Game 5, and we've got the flu game. As we learned from the Last Dance documentary, Michael Jordan actually had food poisoning from eating that pizza the night before Game 5. And despite that, he still lit up the Jazz for 38 points, being super dehydrated and just a shell of himself. He mustered up the strength to be the champion that he is, to be the GOAT. For the Jazz, you run into somebody like that, it's really tough to overcome. It's tough to beat a great team, but it's really tough to beat a great team when their star player is at his weakest and he still has a game for the ages against you. They would then go back to Chicago for Game 6, which was really close within a couple points down to the wire. And then Steve Kerr has his finals moment, hits what would turn out to be the game-winning jumper. And that was it for this Utah Jazz season. Historical season for the Jazz. So many firsts, a lot of regular season and playoff firsts. They just got beat by the better team, and they were better by a few points in a few seconds. It was never a blowout. Had the Jazz played any other team in the finals, I think they win. I think if they don't play the Bulls in the 97 finals and the 98 finals, one of those championships goes to Utah. But we'll never know because the Bulls won both of them, and it just is a bittersweet ending to the Jazz season. Such a great team, such a deep roster, a Hall of Fame coach, 2 Hall of Fame players. This was a really fun one to research, and the Jazz came up just a little bit short in the end and couldn't cap off an historic season with an NBA Finals victory. What do you guys think of my shirt? I got it at the vintage shop. Actually a vintage shirt. It's got a hole in it. Utah Jazz Boosters. If anybody out there knows what that club was about, let me know in the comments.